Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to make a lighthouse window card using this lighthouse window die from Hero Arts. Now, this is going to be a very quick and simple card because the die itself pretty much does everything. Now, because we have the lighthouse, I wanted to have a very simple scene with water behind it. So I'm using some Distress Mica Sprays. I have a little palette here that I made when I first got the second set, and I realized I didn't have all of the colors from the third year that they were released. So I pulled out my sprays and picked out which ones I wanted. Now, typically when I use these sprays in a video, I'll try to stick to one set or 1 year, but because not every set, or there's not a set with a bunch of different blues, I had to pick and choose. So I have 4 different blues here. I have Winter Frost, Phantom Mist, Snow Flurries, and Frozen Fog. And I'll list them in the description with the links to them. They're from different sets. I apologize for that, but for water, you kind of need all blues or whatever. And I wanted to use the mica sprays because they've got some beautiful shimmer to them. If you don't have them or don't want to get them, you could also use Distress Reinkers and add a little bit of Perfect Pearls to them to get that shimmer to it. So there is a way to achieve that without actually having the Distress Mica Sprays, but I love the fact that they have the micas already mixed in with them, and those micas are colored, so it just adds a bit of a different shimmer than using reinkers with Perfect Pearls. Shimmery watercolors would also look really, really nice for this. For the sky, I just used some Speckled Egg Distress Refill and lightly painted it on there. I wanted there to be a distinct difference between the sky and the water. For my lighthouse shadow, I want that shadow to be in black, the lighthouse window. So I'm using some black watercolor paper. It's nice and dark and it's nice and thick and heavy, and I wanted to have that thickness there. After die cutting it one time, it didn't quite go through all of the little nooks and crannies of the dock part of the die. So I flipped it over so the die side was facing up and then ran it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine again, just to make sure that it was completely die cut through before removing that die. By the way, my Distress or my watercolor background was done on Distress watercolor. Any watercolor would work, but I love the Distress because it's nice and bright white and it doesn't have a cream tone to it that changes the colors slightly. So before attaching my lighthouse silhouette to the background, I want to put something in the lighthouse windows. If you just put it on the background, you can see the water right through it. And if you don't mind that, that's totally fine. But it's really easy to cover that up. I have a scrap of yellow cardstock here that I just cut to be narrower than that lighthouse. And then you just need to trim it to the length of a little bit longer than those windows. Add a little bit of liquid glue to the back of the die cut and you can place that right on there and it completely covers all of those windows and you have them nice and filled through and you don't see the water through that. Once that is dry, you can put some more glue on your background and you can place it onto your watercolored water. Now, I ended up doing my water a little bit higher than I had originally intended, even though I put the die beside it and kind of judge from there. I judged a little bit off. What I love to do with some of these backgrounds is have my water a little bit, or my piece of cardstock for my water a little bit bigger. And then when I place that lighthouse or that die cut on top of it, you can have that water part going just a little bit outside for a little bit of a different matte. Because my water is a little bit high, I wasn't able to do that for this, but if you plan ahead, that is something that you can do and it looks really, really cool. Now, I wanted to add a sentiment to this, so I'm using the Let's Celebrate sentiments. It is a better press set. You could also use a stamp for this and do some stamping and embossing. At this point, I wasn't too sure what color I wanted to emboss it with. I end up embossing it with black, but I think this would look really beautiful embossed with gold embossing powder as well because of the yellow in the lighthouse windows, as well as the border that I put on my black piece before assembling my card. Now, before I do my stamping or my better pressing and embossing, I did use the embossing powder tool on my cardstock just to make sure that that embossing powder is only going to stick to where I put my Versamark ink and press it through my Better Press machine and my Platinum 6 machine. I used Versamark ink. Any embossing ink would work here. And I just lightly put it on that Better Press plate just to make sure that I was only getting that ink on that press plate and not on my background. At this point, when you're pouring your powder on your cardstock, if you get any flakes outside of that sentiment, you do want to brush them off. You don't want to wait until after you've embossed, because once they're melted on the cardstock, you can't take it off after that. I'm using my embossing tool to melt that powder and set that sentiment. And I love that this set has several different dies that will work for some of these scripty sentiments. So I'm using the coordinating die with it, placing it down, and I always like to use the Best Ever Craft tape to tape it in place to make sure that it's not going to move on me when I am doing that die cutting. There's nothing worse than spending the time to create a sentiment. It turns out beautiful until you die cut it and that die shifts on you and you have to start all over. So by taping it in place, you can make sure that that die is not going to move. And that tape, I usually use it a couple times. It's good for several uses before you need to toss it away. Now there's a little bit of extra cardstock on that piece that I die cut, so I'm going to cut a couple extra pieces to put behind my sentiment so I have a little bit more dimension on it for the front of the card. So those I don't need to tape in place because it doesn't matter whether that die is, or if that die shifts while it's going through the machine or not. These are pieces that are going to be under my original sentiment, so you're really not going to see the detail of them. I like to glue everything with Barely Art glue in a fine tip bottle. The glue itself is nice and thin, but it starts to grab really quite quickly. And by having a fine tip bottle, I can use that same glue for die cuts like this, even more intricate die cuts, as well as gluing larger pieces to my cards and assembling my cards. I have a gold Sharpie here, and I like to use it sometimes on the edges of darker cardstocks or even tags just to add a little bit of a border. This is a great way to give the look of a mat without actually having a mat behind your cardstock, especially since gold specialty cardstock is a little bit more expensive than regular cardstock, and you would only see just a thin line around the outside edges. This is just a fun little cheat that I like to use. Sometimes I don't do this always. Often I will use regular gold cardstock, especially if I have a sentiment that I also want or die cut out of gold as well, and I will die cut that sentiment out of the center that is hidden underneath. Now that I have my focal piece on my card, I can add my sentiment. And then I wanted the windows of the lighthouse to be a little bit shiny, so I'm adding a touch of glossy accents in here. I have it in a really small bottle with a fine tip needle as well, or fine tip as well, so that I can get really detailed with it. And then I'm using some stickles just to add a little bit of shimmery lines to my water. That water is already very shimmery, but I kind of thought the stickles would just add a little bit of extra texture as well as sparkle, because the glitter from the stickles is just a little bit chunkier than the shimmer from the mica sprays. And that is our finished card. Like I said, it's very quick and easy. The thing that took the longest was waiting for the watercolors to dry. The rest of it came together really, really quickly and really, really well. This would be a great card to produce multiples of them if you wanted to mass produce a card for creating a set, or even this would be a great one to do as a Father's Day card. Again, very, very simple, but it comes together quite quickly. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic day.